I want to start off just a little bit different today. We'll get to our typical first question, but I'm really interested in how this movie began and ended. You remember it began with Father Flynn, doing a sermon on doubt, and you ask questions like, "What do you do when you're not sure?" Right, and then it ended with this fiery, sure person. You know, she had it all put together. She walked to a very sincere and strong spirit, and she said, her last lines were, "I have doubt, sisters. I have doubt."
I know. Yes.
And it took those two things just bookended this movie in just in a remarkable way to try to figure out what is doubt and what do we do with it, right?
It was really hard because, well, you know, it was really hard for me. That, first of all, that brought back a lot of memories because I grew up Catholic in a Catholic school, very strict.
Yeah.
And
you're not quite the age of this. This was like early 60s, but it wasn't that much different when you were there.
No, I was in school in the 60s in a Catholic grammar school.
Okay.
And it was very much like that. And she, like, there were some very mean nuns, very mean, and then there were some very sweet nuns, just like that one nun was so sweet.
And did it hit generationally like this one seemed to, where the sweeter nun was the younger one?
Yes.
Was that the same for you? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And the stricter ones were the older ones.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I had trouble. I mean, she may have been right about the priest. And I know that thing happened and it was covered up and priests were transferred and all that stuff. But I just found him so much more warm and likable. And I found her so difficult and mean.
Yeah. You know, the hard part about this movie is that I don't know if it was true for you, but for me, it was definitely true. He was much easier to believe. I wanted to believe him, and I did not want to believe her, even though I knew absolutely she was right, because, you know, we sit on the other side of the uncovering of all of that. And yet she was the unsympathetic character for me.
Yeah, and she was mean. I mean, it just seemed like she was mean to be mean.
Yeah.
So it was really hard for me. And there was a part of me, and I did go read some stuff after I watched it, you know, of people's comments. And I know that most people thought he was guilty, but some people said, well, what if the secret he was covering up was that he was gay, not that he was molesting the boy?
Which could very well be true.
Yes.
Too. You know, there's all kinds of things that could have been the hidden thing.
So yeah, but through the whole thing, I know, like I said, intellectually, and of course, when I was younger, we had no idea that was going on. I mean, no idea.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't till all the exposure of the abuse by the priests in the Catholic Church, you know.
But it wasn't just that. It was just the sexual mores as a whole. You didn't talk about sex very much at all. Right. In the early part of the 60s, you know, which of course changed completely in the latter part of the 60s.
Right.
There was a whole lot of taboo. If I can broadly categorize the 50s, it was there was the right answer for everything, and you didn't want to sit outside of that right space. You wanted to look the right way, you wanted to act the right way, and it was very regimented in that way. Which of course is part of the reason why the freedom of the late 60s happened, because it was in revolt too much regimentation.
So did you think he was guilty?
I think he probably was. And, you know, it always brings, okay, so let me go back to my early time as a Methodist. This was 1989, 90, when I walked into a Methodist church for the first time. What's really funny is that the funeral I was telling you about, Mary, where we went back to Missouri to bury my grandmother, the church that gave us the space to be able to do that and fixed an amazing dinner for my family, and we have a big family. It was a Methodist church, because that's the way all of my mom's side of the family grew up and has been for generations, right? And so that church where I grew up, and I first went into a Methodist church, within a year of me getting there, the pastor that I loved, who was a good friend of mine, had an affair with one of the parishioners and was essentially kicked out of the church, you know, and tried to erase the memory that he'd ever been there over the next few years. So I understand why somebody wants to do that, because it's simpler, but Stephen was an amazing man and formed many of how I view the world theologically. So I'm very thankful for him. And so I looked at Father Flynn, and I felt the same thing. Here's a man who I think I would want to get to know. The sister, not so much. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I struggle with that to try to figure out, okay, what would I do in that situation? If I know Father Flynn is doing what's not right, what's the right answer of what to do?
But she even doubted, you know, she had some doubt also. So she even doubted a little bit if she was right, because she lied about that phone call. Now, yes, he did. When he heard about that phone call was when he decided to leave. But again, what if the secret was that he was gay?
What if the secret was that he was gay? What if it was something else?
What if it was something
he
else?
never quite revealed?
Yeah.
And what made it even harder, the most intriguing conversation of all for me in this whole movie was the conversation between Donald's mother
I knew you were going to say
and
that.
Sister Aloysius, because she had a very different take on this. She was willing to accept abuse if here was a person who would help her son find community, find vision, find something. Now she might be wrong in that, but I think that there was rightness about what she was doing. Who else would?
He was like the only person who had befriended him.
Who else would have talked to a boy in that age who was trying to find out his sexuality, a sexuality that wasn't matching the rest of everybody else?
And he was being abused by his dad.
And it was being abused by his dad. I get Mom, right? Because she had no way to be able to understand, to be able to know how to or to live into that Donald was giving to her. So she was making the best choice she could make, I think she thought. Life definitely doesn't give us multiple choice, simple to figure out A and B are wrong, and I just have to make a simple choice between C and D. That's not the type of choices we get, right? We have to struggle through much more than that, which
And
leaves us, what if I had done this?
why didn't she really call the other parish? That was one of my questions. Why didn't she really call them? Maybe she wouldn't have gotten an honest answer,
Maybe.
but to me, I felt like she should have not made her conclusion so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I felt.
I think the hard part is she had a conclusion way before that, when she looked out the window
Right.
and she saw, and Flynn tried to call her on that. So that's not enough. And so I think at that point she started saying, what else can I have that I can find that will settle it for me? And so
Right.
when he essentially caved because she lied,
Mm-hmm.
that was the further proof that she needed. That
Mm-hmm.
he knew there was something wrong about him, at least from that she would see as wrong, and that he wasn't willing to let get into the open.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious in the other group, because I don't watch the group on Wednesdays.
Uh-huh.
Did most of them feel that he was guilty?
I think that I think the assumption in the other group was that there was guilt there, of whatever sort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do in the midst of that guilt? One of our strongest principles in Christianity is that principle of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And yet what it actually means and how we actually play it out is really hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you forgive? When do you forget? And when is that the wrong spiritual action?
The thing was, if he was abusing him, he was going to keep abusing other kids. So yes, he really shouldn't have been a priest, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality. He shouldn't have been a priest. But I guess what I felt like, she didn't have enough proof. It was very judgmental.
Uh-huh. But just, Mary, just know that that's completely unlike the church usually is.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, you have, like, I watched recently in the past year, I watched the movie Spotlight,
Mm-hmm.
Which
sits on the other side of the same issue.
Where
Yeah.
they really had to dig to get, when they had to really pursue that story, and there was so much abuse being covered up.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I
and
know there's abuse, and I know it was covered up for a long time, and we had no idea. As parishioners, we had no idea, and
right.
priests were being transferred.
And part of that is for possibly good reasons, because if someone is not perfect, last thing that's really good is to parade them around town and say why they're wrong. We've done that too much in Christianity, right?
Right.
The Salem witch trial type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes because we don't want to go down that road, and sometimes because of our own embarrassment, our own pride issues, we say we got to hide this so that nobody thinks the church is less than what the church is.
Mm.
And one of the things that the Catholic Church tries to do too much is that mother church, right? That perfect birth of coming down from Jesus type of thing. And there's a lot of humanity mixed into that however it was birthed, that has brought us to this point. It's a church, as every church is, that's tainted with humanity,
Mm-hmm.
both in good and bad ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for us to try to pretend that the church is, other than in present instance, the church or church workers aren't perfect, you know. That's, I mean, that's what.
And priests were on a pedestal, but definitely they
Yeah.
were on a pedestal. I remember that.
Yeah, and in some ways that are less than healthy. Okay, so let me tell you just basically the thing about pastoring in a church. You don't get to be quite human as a pastor, right? You get to share your humanity, but you have to be in the relationships within the church different than what most people get to be in the church. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's not inappropriate, but it does mean that sometimes it can become dysfunctional. For example, to think that I have perfect theology, or because I went to seminary I had better theology, can become I know everything and you don't. And that's just ludicrous to think that.
But one thing that makes you more human is that you can be married and have children. And that's way different than the Catholic Church.
Yeah. You know when that started, Mary, by the way?
When?
The priests couldn't get married, and why it started? It started out for a very interesting reason. Right around the turn of the last millennium, right around 1000 AD. At that point, priests were all marrying and having families and children, and they'd begun to get into the practice of essentially passing on parishes as an inheritance to their children. And so the Catholic Church, in response to that, to re-grasp the church and take it out of one more kingdom, they said priests can't be married. And even though priests sometimes were still marrying after that time, they couldn't legally be married, and so they couldn't pass it on to their children. Okay, and so it took the ownership out of that. And so it started for a good reason. It just became something more than just that, and has often been. And it's not that it's only an evil thing. I'm not trying to say that, because there's a lot of really good things that happen there. There's celibacy does take one huge issue out of everything else and can do some really wonderful things. But to force everyone to be that and say you can't be a priest or you can't be a nun unless you are, sometimes puts people into spaces of duplicity. Right?
Or priests leave the church because they decide, and I've met a couple, because they decide they want to get married. You know?
The thing of it is we've always had a poor relationship to sexual mores. We think that because it's a complicated issue, you know, sex and sexual relationships is complicated issues. We think that, oh, we must be much better if we never have children. And so we take Jesus and we turn him into a single man who never had sexual relationships. But when I read about the full human that he is, I just don't think that's true. I think he almost certainly had a wife or had a family of some sort. And for us to write that off differently is essentially saying that would have been sinful of him to have done the normal thing that all of us do. You know, to fall in love, to have a relationship, to have children, to, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to that during those years that he was gone, right? That you know, from 12 to 30, we hear nothing about him. Maybe he had a family, maybe they all died somewhere, and this was him embarking on the second stage of his life. I don't know. Maybe one of the women that we hear about a lot was his companion, you know, Mary Magdalene, or Mary and Martha, you know, who knows? That wasn't the story they were telling, but we tell it as if because she wasn't mentioned, then she wasn't present. I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't either. I don't either.
But the hard part about all of this, like with Father Flynn, you don't know the whole story.
You don't. I know. And yes, he was so likable, and he was nice to the kids. So it was hard to want him to be guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
for Sister Aloysius.
Yeah. Oh, I
It was
know.
easy for her to see him as guilty.
Oh, right, right. But I mean, I didn't want him. I wanted him to somehow redeem himself, just like that young nun did.
Well, I'm glad you're better than Sister Aloysius in that.
Well, she was just mean, and I just had too many teachers like her.
I know.
I didn't like her right from the start. I
No,
didn't.
and you weren't supposed to like her.
No, I
Okay?
know.
She was the decidedly unsympathetic character, and we were supposed to not like her.
Mhm.
But we're also supposed to say, I think we're also supposed to look at her and say, are those types of actions justified?
Mhm.
Okay, especially because we're sitting on the other side of this, and we know all the damage that happened because of priests that abuse children.
Mhm.
And if there'd been more Sister Aloysiuses,
Mhm.
would that have stopped?
Mhm.
And do we have to, as she said a couple times, do we have to take a step away from God in order to fight wickedness?
Siri,
Yeah.
you're not
I
saying.
know. I was trying to find a spot to jump in. Yeah, to kind of go back to whether he was guilty. I first of all, I only got to see the first half of the movie, but I'm doing better than I've been doing sometimes. So that was good. And I was really like awestruck by how beautifully it was filmed. I mean, it's a gorgeous film. And there was one scene where the two nuns are sitting and talking and about the situation with the priest, and Sister Aloysius is sitting in front of a dark green background, and her eyes look kind of dark green. And then the younger nun is sitting in front of a lighter blue, kind of sky blue wall, and her eyes match the wall. And I just was, because of course I'm a painter and I love color, I'm going to notice these things. And I started to think, well, what is it they're getting at here? Why are they setting up like this? But I didn't see anything specific that drew me to think that they were, that they were trying to get a particular message across. But I did see that, that kind of sky blue and that kind of hopefulness and youth and so forth, as compared to the more dark, somber, background behind Sister Aloysius. But really, to go back to the main point, which is, whether he was guilty. It was kind of interesting for me because I looked at it and said, well, yeah, he's so likable. I'd like him not to be guilty, but it's really, there's some things that kind of point to, me being pretty suspicious. One is that he did something that could be considered grooming when he pulled Donald over and showed him this toy and here, play with this, and then gave it to him. And and I know that can be part of it, and it could be perfectly innocent and nothing, but it could also be part of grooming. And it brought up my thoughts about how when we're treated nicely by somebody, then we don't, think that they could actually do something so destructive.
Yeah.
I used to go to 12-step groups, and I actually met a couple of people who were recovering pedophiles. And, and I got to know them for a while, obviously, before I learned that about them. And, and they are the ones who it wasn't somebody else who was telling me. They owned it.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really brave of them. But at the same time, one of them in particular was such a likable guy. He was so popular kind of in the group of friends and so forth. And, I was just kind of shocked
Yeah.
that he would have abused a child.
Yeah.
And, and then I happened to have run into somebody else also who turned out to be a pedophile, and he was he was still on probation and I forgot what it's called, but where you have to call in and check in, and you have to tell them exactly where you're going to be every day from this time to this time and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before you get onto the other kind of probation. But anyway,
Very monitored.
he was not remorseful, really. He just said, well, she was 14 and she had a choice too. And I was like, well, no, I mean, she was 14, but he didn't get it. But he wasn't, he was sort of likable, but not nearly as likable as this one particular person who I would have, seen as a lot like this priest. Just in, interactions with him, I wouldn't imagine
Right.
that there could be this dark side.
And that's because sometimes, Siri, it doesn't seem just so dark as they're moving towards it. The second man you described seems darker, where the first man, I mean, I've known teachers that one of the reasons why they were so good at it is because they thought like that age level of kid, and they had a real ability to be into that space, which means that it's way too simple to think that you are that age level. And if you've seen some of the people that are the pedophile, it's because that's where they relate, is at that space. And so I think they see that more as a peer relationship. I'm not trying to excuse them, but I think that that's what happens.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right. I hadn't thought about it that way.
I hadn't thought about that either, but that's a good perception.
Yeah.
It's tough. And especially it's tough in America today, because I think that pedophilia is one of the unpardonable sins, right? We don't have much belief that people can get beyond it. Now, I have enough belief in humanity that I think we can. We just haven't figured that out yet. What do you do to move into that kind of relationship? I mean,
well, any kind of child abuse is really hard for me. Any kind.
Yeah.
I mean, kids that are being beat, that's hard for me too.
Right. Well, and Donald was getting that from both sides, right? Dad was beating him.
Yes. Yeah, you definitely, you just felt so bad for him. That was the other thing.
Yeah.
He was between a rock and a hard place, kind of like he was wanting to be loved. Obviously, his mother loved him,
It is tough, though, isn't it? If Donald truly was gay, right, which is what they seem to infer, he was probably looking to quite a bit more abuse before he grew up. That was the very typical pattern for a boy trying to discover homosexuality as his norm during that time. It was met with extreme prejudice. And so for mom to find someone who was not going to do that, I think that's why she must have grasped hold of that. Somebody who will not show the negative aspects. I mean, that will not be the negative response to.
Yeah, he wasn't judging him because he was gay.
Yeah. Can only imagine though what I mean. I look at some of my my friends who are about my age, who came out way back when. And I say, how did you ever find the strength to be able to do that? What, because there weren't any kind of societal norms that would have reinforced a coming out of the closet. Right. And so you had to go against literally everything. Right. So what would have been accepted as okay? I don't know.
And it's even still not accepted with certain
It still is not accepted a lot.
groups. I mean, when did the killing of Matthew Shepard happen?
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
90.
I mean,
yeah.
They're still, you know, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can still be killed for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, but that's all of that is just one more aspect of essentially what the film is, and that's an expose on doubt. And it's trying to say that all of us have to deal with it in one way or another. If we are the perpetuator, the Father Flynn, who's doing something, right? He sits in a space of doubt. If we are the ones who are the righteous ones and we're catching the perpetrators in the act of it, you still can't quite do that without doubt. So how have you learned to deal with doubt? What are some of the ways that you've had to face it, and how are you doing? It can be something as simple as just the shaky knees that goes on in every single wedding that I've ever done. Right? Yeah, you have those, what the hell am I doing thoughts? You know, even as you go, but this is the right person, but, you know.
I think when I was raising my kid, I was sure I wanted to get married, and I was sure I wanted to get married to Jeff. But when I was raising my kids, I wasn't always sure I was making the right decisions, or,
Yeah.
you know, I learned one way from my parents that I wanted to do things differently in some ways, but the same in others. And yeah, there's always like, oh, maybe I should be more strict. Oh, maybe I should be more lenient. Maybe, you know, there's a constant doubt there.
Sure. But that's the thing of, I didn't like this when Mom did it to me. And here I am saying the very same thing Mom said to me, because Mom said it to me. And so I learned it, even though I didn't like it. You know,
Right.
so is it the right thing? Or isn't it? The answer is probably maybe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, when you say expressions that your parents used to use.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and you go, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that.
Right. Right. And partially that's because there's not perfect formulaic ways to be able to raise a child, is there?
No. Well, some people think there are.
Well, you can try that, but as soon as you have a second child, that second child will sit outside of whatever formulaic ways you figured out for the first child. Right?
Yes, that's true. That's true. The other thing, I mean, I've had doubts about lots of things, as far as like, I just went through a divorce. I was back and forth on that. We were doing counseling, all these different things. But at what point was I like sure that, all right, this is not working, all the thing, you know?
Yeah.
I was back and forth on that. And once I thought I'd made a decision, then I backed off of it. So there was a lot of doubt there.
I think there's a lot more doubt in the divorce process very often than what there is in the marriage process.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
Because most of us walk away from a marriage with a ton of reasons why we should have, right? A bag, you know, just a whole bag full of the stuff that we did that still doesn't quite convince us.
Mm.
I think it's just almost endemic in divorce. The doubt is there.
Mhm.
I've doubted myself a lot, and it's certainly I've dealt with a lot of doubt. Um, uh, but one thing that comes to mind for me is in my artwork, because I've got 2 degrees in fine art, and so I've taken a lot of studio classes.
Uh-huh.
and you know, and painted in a lot of different kinds of styles, and you know, learned a lot, and I mean, the education was wonderful, and part of it is you do have to kind of try out, you know, some famous painter's style for a while to try to live in their shoes and get a feeling for what they were getting at, and then sort of try to evolve a little bit and make it more your own. And you know, that's usually later in undergraduate school. And so I did, you know, a number of those, and then I started to have, you know, somewhat of my own ideas and my own style. And actually, when I was working on my bachelor's degree, towards the end there, I started working on making goddess sculptures, working off of the ancient figurines from Crete and well, mainly Crete, but some Greece, and like 2000 BC, and started thinking about, because these were goddess temples, and I was thinking about, you know, feminism and how you know, the patriarchy is defined so much of religion, you know, as it's practiced now.
Mhm.
And I started to think about, well, what might that religion have been like,
Yeah.
and that experience like, and learned about the North Door and churches in England for people who were of the goddess religion, so that they could, you know, have a place, a way of being, and it meant they came and went through the North Door, from what I understood.
Mhm.
You know, and things like that. It was really interesting. And so I was making these sculptures, and this is back in, you know, I graduated from the San Francisco Art Institute in 1980. So this was just before then. And you know, before that, I was doing kind of what was more acceptable in some sense, quite from my painting teachers, but now, you know, I was doing something that was like off the wall, and you know, and even a little dangerous. Like they could understand feminism when it's, you know, had to do with, like, there was somebody making art where she depicted women ironing clothes and this sort of thing, you know, kind of doing ordinary housewife type things. And they were, you know, very accepting of that, and her feminist ideas there. But here I was just really going out on a limb. I was going to do it. And I had a lot of fear and a lot of doubt doing it. And yet I had a lot of feeling like I really needed to do this, and this needed to be said. And so, you know, and I've tended to do this, and you know, then I ran into so much kind of doubt in my own self that I didn't really pursue that.
Right.
And then of course I go on to a different style and so forth. And so sometimes I still, you know, think about that, like, so, you know, where could I have gone if I had taken that path more?
Yeah.
But you know, there is no way to go back and take a different path. It's just, it's what
I know
happens.
that's true. You think like, oh, maybe if I'd gone back and done this differently, but you can't. You can't
Yes.
anyway.
Yeah.
As you were talking, Siri, that I thought of a book that I have by a man named David Griebner. He is a United Methodist pastor. I want to say in the Ohio area, somewhere back there. And it's a series of stories, kind of parable type of stories, right? And one of them talks about a person, I think it's a woman, who comes through the door and finds herself on the stage, right? Full auditorium. And she pauses for a second, and then she goes, oh, I know what to do. She steps to the front of the stage and she repeats the words she heard before. She says, we are going to sing with one voice. We're going to sing all together, and we're going to sing wonderfully and well, and until you find the voice that is your voice. And when you find a voice that is yours, it'll be time for you to go. Right? And so they sing, and she teaches them to sing, right? And they sing one note, then another note, and then periodically somebody finds a harmonic note that goes there and starts singing another melody along with her. And she looks at them and nods, and they go out, right? And as it goes along, you follow one of the people out, and then you're back at the beginning of the story, where they go through this door and suddenly they're on a new stage in front of another group of people. And their job then is to sing the song that they have within them, the song that they kind of learned, but was different than the song that their teacher was teaching them. But they come there and they sing this new song to this group until they find their voice.
Hmm.
And it sounds like that's part of what you were doing. You're learning the master who says, here's something that you're supposed to do, but your job is really to go beyond that ultimately, and to find your voice, your style.
Yeah.
And the cheap way to do it is to just sit and hum along with somebody else's song, right? And never take that extra effort. And I think that was at least part of what Sister Aloysius was dealing with in Sister James, in Donald's mother, in Father Flynn even. All of them were trying to push her beyond this certainty, this firm, never question, Father, Mother Church, here's the way it goes. And all of them were looking at it differently. And, she had to figure out if she was her old church the right church, essentially.
But he did want to move the church forward. Right.
And it needed to be moved. This is also in the space of Vatican II, which was definitely challenging many of the church norms. And it was saying, we're going to take away this thing, that Latin mass. We're going to take this stuff away. That these kinds of things are not as important as they were before. And of course, the Sister Aloysius,
she was tradition. She was like the tradition song.
That's right. Yeah. And that type of person, it's really easy for them to think that what they're holding on to has never changed ever. Kind of that, well, Jesus had a thing just like the school I'm setting up, exactly the same way I'm setting it up. And it's never that way. We all know it's not that way. But if I am that kind of holding on to a tradition, it's usually because I want to say it's the really right way that I ought to carry on.
My grandmother was really upset when they stopped having Latin masses. And I remember there was like one mass a priest was doing during the week, early morning, that she would go to just to hear the Latin mass,
There's still places that are still doing a Latin mass occasionally. You don't see them very often, and there's people who that's what they want to do for whatever reason.
Because I feel like most of the people that grew up with Latin, I can see where it's a comfort thing, it's a security thing, but it's what you're used to. But then, like I said, my grandparents have all been dead for a long time. It's like they're the previous generation, right, to my parents. So who's around that's used to Latin masses,
The hard thing is, though, when you talk about comfort, and I believe a church has a certain degree of where it gives comfort, right? There's no doubt that's there. I do think, though, that my basic definition of God is not a God of comfort, but a God who draws us forward, which often means not comfort. And so if all we're doing is giving comfort, we're probably not quite speaking God to each other anymore. No matter how much it feels like it, because we're saying things like, God loves you all the time, no matter what, and God is taking care of you right now. And sometimes those are comforting, good things for us to say, but sometimes we say them in ways that makes it so that we don't move. And that's what God's wanting us to do.
Mhm.
Men said that for years, Siri, in feminism issues. Men said, no, this is where we're comfortable, and this is what God wants. And
Mhm.
men needed to be moved. They needed to be uncomfortable.
Yes, it did. Absolutely. It still needs to be moved.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there still is. And with racism, sexism and racism.
At
We
least
just,
part
we
of
just
the last
discovered,
elections.
yeah, we just discovered that the past 4 years, that racism and sexism has not died.
Very, very alive.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And the hard part is trying to figure out how to take all those steps when they are challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you are as sure as what Sister Aloysius is, at the end she sits there and goes, I have such doubts.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. Yep.
Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about Maya Angelou and her poetry, freedom poetry, that which carries us somewhere to better freedom. Thursday night next week, there will not be a class. It's Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you can go to any of the other classes or watch the recordings. There's going to be one on Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Saturday morning. And then Thursday night we'll start the week after. And that'll only be 3 weeks of that class.
So the movie one, there's Wednesday morning, right?
There is not. We decided that we would not do the last movie class.
Okay.
Oh, okay. It's just canceled.
Yeah. So sorry, I didn't say that. We decided not to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we're just like
this,
starting reading the poetry, start it next week or whatever.
Just get the booklet. Like I said, on Sunday for sure there will be a link. I think that link may already be on the web page. I don't know for sure. I haven't looked, but the newsletter is there. Melissa said she got the newsletter done, and so that's there. There's also going to be a lot of other things to do during Advent. So read the newsletter and see all the different ways to get involved. There's a lot of a lot of good ways to do stuff. Especially Mary, you might want to do the longest night event that we have. You know what?
Yeah, the 21st.
We've done that a lot. And I think it's the 20th. It's a Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
Going towards evening, 4 to 6 p.m. And what we're going to do is kind of stations that people go to, and it'll be kind of self-directed. We'll have a little booklet that we'll put together of some sort to say, here's station 1 and here's the reading for that, or here's this other station.
I feel like have San Francis done that before? Because I feel like I've done that. And then I used to be in a women's group at St. Francis, and we always did something for the longest night.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so let me tell you my own story. My sister and her husband were killed in a car accident on Thanksgiving morning. My dad died of a heart attack on New Year's Eve late. And so those two events bookend my holidays. And as joyful as the holidays can be, that also sits there around that. And many of us have stories like that, where it's not just a jolly holiday, it's also all the other stuff. And that's what longest night service is for, is to say, what is it that, and especially this year when we all have more than our share. not quite perfect. And so come and take advantage of that if you want to.
Yes, I will. I will.
And like I said, we try to put a good amount of time, 2 hours, and people can come at any time during those 2 hours to be able to and go in whatever order they need to, so that if there's a bunch of people over that direction, you can go the other direction, whatever you need to feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for all your discussion, for all your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. This was great.
Yeah, type of issues we had to
Yeah.
deal with weren't easy all the time, but you guys did a good job.
No, this was great. The movies, they were great. A good variety.
All right, you guys take care. Have a good
All
Thanksgiving.
right.
Maybe I'll see you at one of the other classes, and then on a Thursday in 2 weeks, we'll have a class here at this time.
Okay. All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.